This is my 11th alternative budget that we've done, so 11 times that we're responding to a government's budget. And our job here today is to cut through some of the spin of government, cut through the way that they play with numbers and actually get right down to the facts of it. So our focus here is about, does this budget deliver for families and workers? Does it give them the break that they deserve?
Well, budget day is always one of the busiest days of the year for us. Our job is to try and get as much exposure for our spokespeople and to try and make sure our message is right and that people are hearing it. We're very, very busy here. We're just compiling the list of different media bids, radio, TV, newspapers. Joe's working on our initial lines. We've spokespeople going into studios even before the budget is delivered. So it's a long day, it's a busy day, but we're getting used to it at this stage.
So that's what I'm saying,
It's actually surprising that the government haven't gone further than what is suggested. I think this budget is going to be very unflattering. It's not going to in any way give those families that need a break the break that they deserve. They're not doing anything real in terms of the crisis in health. There's very little being talked about in terms of housing. Some of the spin that's coming out in terms of home help hours, for example, fail to even address the crisis they're in at the minute. So nothing really surprising here, but probably predictable from a government that's really ran out of options and choices and lacking vision at this stage. Our job is to cut through the spin, because in budget day the minister gets up, he speaks for an hour and he gives out great numbers and it sounds fantastic if you're sitting at home. Our job is to look through those numbers to actually see what's really happening, what's really been announced, what's really new, and then lay it bare for the public to see. Tax on a rate. Yeah. But
what we'll be looking for are measures that are going to make a real and meaningful difference for people who are on waiting lists, are going to make a real and meaningful difference for people who are being left on trolleys. Past performance doesn't indicate that this government are willing to do anything to tackle the crisis around health. We know that this government have no interest in a public health service. They've been systematically running it down. 8 years of Fine Gael in government and the waiting lists are getting longer.
Protect recent progress in our economy. It will act as a bridge to a better future.
Sure, an oak to push a dagger gums massam. Either you're going to need small we got can blame one. Agus gackle blame being another oringa agus in front that you've hearing a guy needs jackra agus needs jackra. We're kind of the layer done pubble. Gadirach will balak diffru down. Shakas and Balaki around in Fine Gael, no Fine Fáil, Harna Blinta, RTN and she'd cussant looked and rock Mr. Tearshaw, Shakas Dáil and Granadina.
Good. How are you? We're done the great I got a lectlishne 5 in the morning at a score much a lake silhouette and you since the economic crash.
The Good Friday Agreement. I'm sure.
Well, this should have been the budget in which the government gave workers and families a break. They've failed, they've missed the opportunity. The Sinn Féin team led out by Pearse Doherty have delivered the alternative, have delivered what ought to have been today a budget that certainly prepared us for Brexit, prepared our economy for the shock that will be Brexit, but most importantly invested in services and people, because it's our people, it's our workers, it's our families and communities that will be the strongest bulwark against Brexit. So it's very disappointing. They've come up short on housing, on health, on childcare, nothing really on childcare. I think people will be disappointed on disability, mental health services, very, very meagre mention of those particular areas. So, no great surprise, it's a Fine Gael budget. Fianna Fáil is tapping itself on the back for a job well done, but I can tell you it's a budget that in no way gives workers and families the break that they need and that they deserve.
Thanks a million.
Yeah, so we're just finished the budget. I'm just out of the chamber, and look, I've done my budget response to it. It was as predicted. A lot of the measures were leaked out earlier on. It's clear that the government are trying to do wee bits and pieces here and there to try and to win a bit of support. I think the big issue for me was that there was no vision at all. There was no attempt of a vision at all, and it was so blatant from Fine Gael, but probably more so from Fianna Fáil, that it was like, don't blame me, it's Brexit. Now, we have provided in our alternative budget for a €2 billion Brexit stabilisation fund, which is bigger than the government's, and we still were able to meet the needs, change society for the better in terms of improving people's outcomes. But it looked like a government that was really out of ideas, to tell you the God's honest truth, you know, that are at the end of the road and just try to appease as many of their ministers as possible.
Pearse Doherty, you've strongly criticised the government's carbon tax measures as being unfair to the weakest. What would Sinn Féin have done, and did the government really have any choice but to be cautious with this budget?
Of course they did have a choice. Budgets are all about political choices, and what families and workers needed was they needed a break, and instead what they got wasn't a budget that was addressing the high costs in childcare or insurance or the high rental costs or the crisis we have in our health service. Instead they got was additional taxes in the form of carbon tax, which isn't going to change behaviour. All it will do is make those sectors and those individuals and families poorer. So the ESRI, the Department of Finance have all said that this will hit rural families most, it will hit low-income families harder, and it will hit lone parents. Instead, what should have been done is a real radical investment in the alternatives.
As we heard, the Minister for Finance said that his budget measures were influenced by the increasing likelihood of a no-deal Brexit.
The Brexit referendum caused sterling to slump, but it still supplies customers in Northern Ireland, sources milk there and imports fruit from Europe via the UK land bridge.
The carbon tax that's introduced, it's regressive. It's not only us that are saying that in Sinn Féin, the Department of Finance is saying it, the ESRI are saying it. Who's it going to hurt the biggest? Rural dwellers, lone parents and people with the lowest incomes. That's the reality of it. I think the debate was fair enough. It's always difficult with 6 people on a panel. You know, the way it used to be here was that the main party of opposition debated with the minister. It's far better for the viewers. You can get into the nitty-gritty. The minister won't do that anymore, even though RTE are looking for that every year. But look, I think we showed very clearly that Brexit doesn't need to be or shouldn't be used as an excuse for all the things that could have happened in this budget, that there was other sources of revenue from banks, from investors, from some of the cuckoo funds and speculators that could have been raised that could have made a real difference to families by delivering on some of the key measures that we want. So that was it. I think for Pascal's point of view, his job there was tonight was talk Brexit and try and hope that it will sing, you know, to try and fool the people and suggested that he couldn't do anything because of Brexit. That isn't the reality. And unfortunately, this time next year, I think we're going to be in a worse situation in terms of health, a worse situation in terms of housing, and a lot more pressures facing down on families as a result of what the government have done tonight in this budget.
Thanks a lot.
See you later. Take care.